Hi everyone, I just finished recording the October themed unboxing for my Charm Box of Shadows subscription, so I figured while I'm on camera, time to actually, finish these recaps. I know this one is quite late, but that's because as I was doing my marathon, I was so close to the finish line. I was doing so well that I didn't want to stop and take a break and be derailed. So I was just like, okay, I'll leave these. And then when I was finished with my marathon, I'm like, I'm gonna sleep for a couple days because I was tired. So I did. I took some rest. So today I am recapping films 120 to 149, I think. Anyway, so let us begin. Film number 120 in my 31 Days of Halloween marathon was Maniac, a 2012 French-American psychological slasher film directed by, here we come with the eternal struggle of pronouncing director names, Frank Calfoun? I'm trying to think of noun, found, calfoun, I think, who knows? With a screenplay by Alexandre Aja and Gregory Levasseur, and is a remake of the 1980 film of the same name. It follows the violent exploits of a brutal serial killer. I actually watched the original film last year and I was not happy. This film is all shot through the perspective of the killer except for a couple scenes, so the film feels very voyeuristic. For me personally, this felt very disorienting and I didn't enjoy it, but I will say there were some shots that really impressed me because I don't know how they filmed them without having the camera in the shot, or how they made some of the injuries look real without the camera cutting away. The scalping scenes, however, were dreadful, as you could see how fake they were. At one point he cuts her forehead a fraction, yet her entire scalp comes off with ease, not even anywhere near where he cut. In another, you can see him picking up the scalp before he started cutting, and you can see where the wig starts and the real scalp attaches, so I wasn't buying any of it. A lot of it is identical to the original, but with better quality. I think Elijah Wood does a terrific job in this film, and I think some of the attacks in the film were quite brutal and did seem believable, certainly got a reaction out of me. But then there are others where it's, as I said, fake. He's stabbing someone and you can see the blade retract, so it kills the illusion. I think it's better than the original, but it's not a great film either. One thing that I would like to say is when I was looking up the trivia for this film, apparently fans of the original, because it has a bit of a cult following, were really against Elijah Wood being cast as a serial killer in this film and said he was too attractive to be a serial killer. Let's just think on that for a moment, shall we? People like Ted Bundy had people with freaking marry me signs outside the prison. I don't need to say anything because if you have half a brain, you already know what I'm thinking and feeling, but that is just a fucking stupid comment. That's all I wanted to say. Number 121 is Matriarch, a 2018 British horror thriller film written and directed by Scott Vickers. In it, an expecting mother and husband crash their car in the countryside and are offered shelter by a farmer and his wife. Rachel soon realizes the farmer's children are in fact stolen. Just as they try to escape from the farm, Rachel goes into labor. I have to say, I was really surprised and impressed by this one. This film had a really good story, was well written, had a bunch of great characters, performed fantastically by the cast, and had great filming and direction. When it comes to independent horror films, it's hard to find any that do even two of those things well, let alone all of them, so I was really impressed. It's a good subject, and you could feel that anxiety and determination and instinct in our main character to escape and save her child, and I like how she kept having obstacles to get past. Nothing was ever clear cut and the end was never certain. I even appreciate that they gave more to the husband instead of him just being a throwaway character. I suspected the twist at the end, but I think they timed it very well and revealed it perfectly. Overall, great independent horror film with impressive special effects done at what I assume was a small budget and all done in a 12-day time frame. One of the better ones I watched last month. Number 122 is Microwave Massacre, a 1983 American black comedy horror film directed by Wayne Berwick with a screenplay by Thomas Singer from a story by Craig Muckler. Fed up of his wife's bad cooking, Donald kills her and turns to cannibalism to satisfy his appetite. I decided to put this on my list after seeing Lola Loves Films watch it last year. If you enjoy B-horror movies, then this is up your alley, and it certainly has that B-horror movie charm, and I would have enjoyed that if it weren't for the fact so much of this film is not a horror film, but a bad 70s porn flick. The acting is positively atrocious, and the scripted dialogue is horrific. I mean, at one point a woman is plowing her garden with a vibrator, for Pete's sake. Number 123 is The Mummy, a 1932 American pre-code horror film directed by Carl Friend with a screenplay by John L. Banderston from a story by Nina Wilcox Putnam and Richard Shire. The film is about an ancient Egyptian mummy named Imhotep who is discovered by a team of archaeologists and inadvertently brought back to life through a magic scroll. I really enjoyed this one, some really great qualities, and I love its use of Egyptian mythology, and its score is terrific. It's actually made me appreciate the 90s remake a lot more. While they have similarities, they are different, but in a good way, though I can hear that the remake tried to replicate the original film's score but update it, which I love. I also have now noticed that there are elements in this film that are included in the remake sequel too, which is cool. Number 124, The Mummy's Hand, a 1940 American black and white horror film directed by Christy Cabane and written by Griffin J. and Maxwell Shane. It is not a sequel to the 1932 film, but a reimagining. In it, an ancient mummy is revived to destroy the invaders of the 3,000-year-old tomb of an Egyptian princess. I didn't enjoy this reimagining. It only goes for an hour, but the mummy doesn't even appear until the last 15 minutes. It's more about the expedition and two guys spending most of the film trying to get funding. Very little mummy action at all. It was quite boring, and some of the characters were quite annoying. Didn't have any of the good qualities of the original, but I can tell the remake took inspiration from both the original and this film, which is kind of neat. I didn't even like the name changes for the mummy and princess either, but yeah, not a fan of this one because it's quite dull. Sorry. Number 125, The Mummy's Tomb, a 1942 American horror film directed by Harold Young from a screenplay by Griffin J. and Henry Susha from a story by Neil P. Varnick. It's a sequel to the 1940 film, and in it a high priest travels to America with a living mummy to kill those who had desecrated the tomb of an Egyptian princess 30 years earlier. Most impressive thing about this film is that a mummy knows how to use a door. The first 15 minutes of this film really are just a recap of the last film, which feels unnecessary. I'm not a fan of the plot, as I don't understand why you'd wait 30 years to kill the people who disturbed the tomb in question. That makes no sense. Also, considering this film is set technically in the 70s, the film didn't attempt to think of what the 70s might look like, but honestly, I actually like this one a bit more than the previous film. But despite these films being called The Mummy, Karis, the mummy, isn't the villain of either film. Everything he does because he has been ordered to and is under the control of someone else, and is just acting out the deeds they wish him to do. He has no control, not even over his own body, forced to live forever and never granted the freedom of death. It's the human characters giving the orders who are the villains. The mummy seems like a victim to me. Also, aspects of this film felt very much like Frankenstein. Number 126, The Mummies Ghost, a 1944 American horror film directed by Reginald Lee Borg from a screenplay by Griffin J., Henry Susha, and Brenda Weisberg from a story by Griffin J. and Henry Susha. It's the second sequel to the 1940 film, and in it, an Egyptian priest travels to America in search of the bodies of an Egyptian princess and her living mummified guardian with consequences. The last film said all the priests were gone, they were the last of the order, and now this film has more of them. Make up your mind. The start of this film is near identical to the start of the last film, so it feels repetitive. It had a couple interesting additions, but overall I found this continuation to be quite bland. It just seems like there wasn't a point to creating all these sequels. They all just keep repeating all the things the one before it did. And the way Amina's hair was going white, she looked like the bride of Frankenstein, so again, it's another film that feels similar to Frankenstein. Number 127, The Mummy's Curse, a 1944 American horror film directed by Leslie Goodwin with a screenplay by Bernard Schubert from a story by Leon Abrams and Dwight B. Badcock. It's the third sequel to the 1940 film and the fifth entry in the Universal Pictures original Mummy franchise. An irrigation project in rural bayous of Louisiana unearths living mummy Caris, who was buried in quicksand 25 years earlier. So based on timeline, technically this film should be set in the 90s, but again, no attempt to make it look futuristic, which is disappointing. It would have been interesting to see how these films predicted the future to look. These films make me feel so bad for Caris. Just want the poor guy to just die and rest in peace. Again, the start of the film recaps the story about Caris, which we've heard told so many times now that it's getting boring. I just couldn't get into this one. It's more of the same old stuff, and I find it strange how the films say their souls love each other, yet Ananka is always running for the hills from him. These films are just depressing in terms of their story, but I'm a total Caris sympathizer here. Number 128, Mystery of the Wax Museum, a 1933 pre-code mystery horror film directed by Michael Curtis from a screenplay by Don Mullally and Carl Erickson based on an unpublished short story called The Wax Works by Charles S. Belden. The disappearances of people and corpses leads a reporter to a wax museum and a sinister sculptor. I really enjoyed this film, its story, how it plays out, even the journalistic aspect to it. I loved how this was filmed, and I love the performances, especially that of Lionel Atwill. My favorite moment of the film is the face reveal. That was so perfectly done, and in the 30s no less, very effective, and it looked terrific. Brilliant film. House of Wax, a 1953 American color 3D horror thriller film directed by André de Toth from a screenplay by Crane Wilbur. It's a remake of the 1933 film and is about a disfigured sculptor who repopulates his destroyed wax museum by murdering people and using their wax-coated corpses as displays. It is so very rare for a remake to be better than the original, especially when the original is so perfect, but damn, is this perfection or what? I haven't seen this version in years, but it's even better than I remember it. It's darker, more daring, and so very effective. Vincent Price really pushes the performance, making his character far more tender and then menacing than the original film. The character has an almost Phantom of the Opera quality to him in this version, and it works so perfectly. You can see in him and the performance that his personal story is one of tragedy, while for the others it's one of horror. The face reveal is even better in this one, and the original was already amazing. So many aspects are identical to the original, but then others have been changed, and it's all the right changes. A rare exception to the remake rule, but this one surpasses the original. Number 130, Nails, a 2017 Irish-British horror film directed by Dennis Bartok and written by Bartok and Tom Abrams. A track coach who is paralysed after a hit-and-run accident. Upon waking in the hospital, she is haunted by a ghost. It's not a terrible film by any means. It has some great performances. I just found the plot to be quite lacking. The backstory is very unfinished. It doesn't tie into the entire plot as well as the film might think it does. It leaves many questions unanswered, and the ending was unfortunately anticlimactic. I think the film tried to make some jump scares, but there wasn't any payoff to them. My butt stayed right where it was. Number 131, Never Open the Door, a 2014 American horror mystery science fiction film directed by Vito Trabucco and written by Trabucco and Christopher Maltoro. Three happy couples enjoy the holidays in a cozy secluded cabin in the woods when they are suddenly interrupted by an unprecedented event that will forever change their lives. For starters, another film with an incorrect synopsis. There are not three happy couples, there are two couples and two of their single friends. As for the film itself, if you're an Eraserhead fan, then perhaps this will appeal to you, but this was a hard no from me. The acting in this film is terrible, the editing is inconsistent, and the fact it is in black and white adds nothing to the film. With some films, the choice to have them in black and white adds a special atmosphere to the film. You can see it in films like A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night or A Floresta das Almas Perdidas. Had those films been in colour, something would have been lost. But this film feels like it does not benefit from black and white and is only done to make it appear more artistic than it is. Only during the last couple of minutes did the black and white feel appropriate. Can't say the plot or sequence of events made much sense to me either. The script, if there was one, is terrible because most of the time all the characters are yelling and talking over each other at the same time, and very rarely do you hear one person speak at a time, so you can almost never understand what is being said. Number 132, Night, a 2019 American horror film written and directed by Nicholas Michael Jacobs. A young girl is kidnapped by a strange man who forces her to be the star of his sick and twisted live stream. Absolutely, positively god-awful. This film is trying to be a fake snuff film, but it's the worst one I've ever seen. It makes some of the same dumb decisions a found footage film does, which is having footage being recorded that in reality would never be recorded, so it makes what is there idiotic. The acting is terrible. The worst acting coming from the victim. She gets punched and doesn't react, slapped and doesn't react, cut and stabbed and still doesn't act fazed. I can tell you, I've had a couple of those things happen to me and it fucking hurts. You'd have a reaction besides just sitting there unbothered. Everything looks fake. When he kicks her, you can see he's not kicking her. When he cuts her, you can see fake blood is on the knife and he's just painting it on her skin. He stabs her in a place where there is a bone and wriggled the handle around and still she doesn't react. He is meant to smack her head into a wall, but you can see her head never actually touches it. The dialogue is atrocious, and when the two characters speak, it's absolutely stupid what they say to each other. It was the longest hour of my life, not to mention the position of the camera was horrible. You see more of the door than of the person, and the guy who I think is the director is in front of the camera the entire time, making it impossible to see anything. There was a good premise here, but zero successful execution. Number 133, The Nightmare Before Christmas, also known as Tim Burton's The Nightmare Before Christmas. Damn, I really should have put it on my Nightmare Before Christmas jacket for this one. Oh, I'll do it in the next one. A 1993 American stop-motion animated musical dark fantasy Halloween Christmas film directed by Henry Selick, from a screenplay by Caroline Thompson, based on the story and characters by Tim Burton. It tells the story of Jack Skellington, the king of Halloween Town, who stumbles through a portal to Christmas Town and decides to celebrate the holiday. Still a classic and perfect for the Halloween season with phenomenal music by Danny Elfman. I don't know anyone who doesn't at least know one song from this movie. No matter how many years go by, this movie still captures myself and others and will continue to do so for years to come. It's perfect for Halloween and Christmas, and I love that it has a quality about it that still captivates even children today. Number 134, Occupant, a 2011 American thriller film directed by Henry S. Miller and written by Jonathan Brett. 25-year-old Danny Hill's grandmother just died, giving Danny the chance to move into her enormous rent-controlled apartment in Manhattan. Danny must lock himself in for 12 days before he can take over the lease. There's just one problem. He may not be the only occupant. I find it funny that this guy started going nuts after being alone in his apartment at the 5-day mark. Me leaving the house is a rarity and I don't go nuts. His temporary female companion in the film was not a good inclusion and her character wasn't well thought out. Also, how does this guy not own a cell phone? And I'm surprised his laptop doesn't have a single film on it for him to watch. Life without Wi-Fi does exist. As for the final scene, I'll just say he had injuries go right through him, but the objects in question were not big enough to go through the entire body, so I'll just say that. It's got good performances, it's just not a very interesting film to watch. I also just don't believe in any of the events that happen, and I don't believe someone would go so insane in just 2 weeks, and the supposed twist at the end just does not work with the rest of the film. Number 135, One of Us, a 2017 American horror mystery film directed by Blake Regal and written by Andrea Ajamian and Blaine Chiappetta. Chiappetta. A young journalist goes deep undercover within a mountain commune and becomes manipulated by a duplicitous cult leader. Honestly, not half bad. Nothing too untoward happens in this film, so for the subject matter, it's one of the more tame depictions I've seen, but it's still high on the creep meter, but that's again due to the subject of the film. I've always found cults to be scary and disturbing because they are very real things and because they are so messed up. So this film certainly delivers what it's selling. Number 136, Out of the Dark, or Aguas Rojas, a 2014 independent English language Spanish-Colombian supernatural thriller film directed by Luis Quelles and written by Alex Pastor, David Pastor, and Javier. A couple and their daughter move to Colombia to take over a family manufacturing plant only to realize their new home is haunted. Pretty good with some decent jump moments, but not very severe. Has an interesting plot with a story that didn't quite go how I expected, but the basic structure of the film was predictable, with the usual sins of the father type of story. Overall, I enjoyed it. I think there were a couple of hiccups writing-wise, but on the whole, it was well done and I liked it. Number 137, Pet Sematary, a 1989 American supernatural horror film directed by Mary Lambert with a screenplay by Stephen King adapted from his 1983 novel of the same name. After tragedy strikes, a grieving father discovers an ancient burial ground behind his home with the power to raise the dead. Between everyone rewatching this and the remake and posting about them, I am amazed I've managed to avoid knowing any details about this film for all these years. So everything that occurs was completely fresh and a surprise to me. It's quite a depressing film and storyline, but those last 20 minutes sure do escalate and definitely got a few reactions out of me. Definitely not the kind of film you want to watch if you prefer happy endings. Regardless, I rather enjoyed it, especially the last 20 minutes. Woo! Number 138, Pet Sematary 2, a 1992 American horror film directed by Mary Lambert and written by Richard Alton. It's a sequel to the 1989 film and sees a teenage boy and his father move to his recently deceased mother's hometown, where they encounter the ancient Native American cemetery with the power to raise the dead. The soundtrack couldn't get more 90s, and while that's a fact I enjoy, I don't agree with the placement of any of the songs. The film is okay, but it's too over the top and is really just a sequence of events with no real story. There never feels like there is anything lost or gained, and you aren't invested in the characters. A character is a violent jerk who dies and comes back a more violent jerk. A violent bully dies and comes back as a more violent bully. Nothing even makes those characters different aside from the corpse makeup. It's an okay watch with a couple of nods to the original film, but there's just not much substance there. The disappointing thing is that the director Mary Lambert wanted to go in a completely different direction, but as usual, studios fucked her over and said, nope, we want you to do this, and as usual, what the studios want sucks. Number 139 is Pet Sematary, a 2019 American supernatural horror film directed by Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer with a screenplay by Jeff Buller from a story by Matt Greenberg. It's the second adaptation of Stephen King's 1983 novel of the same name, and it follows a family that discovers a mysterious graveyard in the woods behind their new home. Mostly, I was bored by this film. For me, it's another example of a remake fail. It tries to be darker and scarier than the original, which it obviously is, but in doing so, there's no soul. The theme or central focus of the original story is gone. There's no soul to this one, which is kind of ironic. In the original, my take was I could see a film about grief and acceptance and how those who can't come to terms with it eats away at them. With the remake, I don't get any of that. This film makes me feel nothing but boredom. The changes made are completely unnecessary, and only one moment made me feel anything. In regards to a certain injury sustained by Judd, the film gives a nod to it but doesn't follow through, as that would be too expected. Instead, it includes the same injury but in a new way, so it's more unexpected. This was effective and well thought out and was the only moment in the film I enjoyed. The rest I thought was kind of crap. Number 140, Phantasms, a 1979 American science fantasy horror film written and directed by Don Coscarelli. A supernatural and malevolent undertaker turns the dead of Earth into dwarf zombies to be sent to his planet and used as slaves. This honestly did nothing for me, and I found it very hard to follow and get into. I did kind of enjoy the second half more though. Music was hilariously strange, that's for sure, and I didn't get the change at the end, but I will say I'm starting to think A Nightmare on Elm Street's final scene was taken from Phantasm. Number 141, Phantasm 2, a 1988 American science fantasy action horror film directed and written by Don Coscarelli. It's a sequel to the 1979 film and the second installment in the Phantasm franchise. In it, the first film's protagonist, Mike, recently released from a mental institution, recruits Reggie and some new friends in an effort to defeat the villain Tall Man. I found this one slightly easier to follow, though not entirely. The end of the last film cancelled out most of what happened in the events of the film, and then the events that followed the opening of this film cancel out its opening, so I'm thoroughly confused. After that, it makes a bit more sense if I do my best to ignore those issues. Feels kind of like Supernatural, two guys driving around the country hunting the monster that killed their loved ones. Make the car an Impala and it really would be Supernatural. The psychic link stuff confused me as well, but as I said, it's still a slightly better watch, but these films still don't make much sense to me. I think I'm just not the target audience for them, although the dwarves in this franchise all look like Jawas from Star Wars when they have their hoodies on, like for real. Number 142, Phantasm 3, Lord of the Dead, also known as Phantasm 3, a 1994 American science fantasy horror film written and directed by Don Coscarelli. It's the third installment in the Phantasm series, and in it, Mike and Reggie continue to hunt the mysterious tall man, discovering along the way that the invasion has already begun. This is the first time I've enjoyed a film series more with each installment. This one has some new fun characters, is easy to follow, though still makes me confused about the first film, and I think it's neat how they brought back all the original cast for this one, so the whole gang is back together. Number 143, Phantasm 4, Oblivion, also known as Phantasm Oblivion, a 1998 American science fiction fantasy horror film written and directed by Don Coscarelli. I may have been saying his name wrong, but that doesn't surprise me. It's the fourth installment in the Phantasm series and sees Mike travel through time and dimensions to find the tall man's origins. Okay, I was back to not being into it again for this one. This one was pretty slow. Again, some elements felt like they were taken from A New Hope, but for the most part, it just felt like it was taking forever to tell the story, and sometimes it was getting confusing. So for me, this was like moving backwards, not forwards. Was impressed and curious as to how they were able to have scenes with young Mike or young Jodie that were real actors, even though they were all grown up, because de-aging technology is great, but not that great, and not in 1998 either. It's also pretty neat that Angus Scrimm has been consistently playing the tall man for all these years. Number 144, Phantasm Ravager, also known as Phantasm 5. Are we shocked? Because I'm not. A 2016 American science fantasy action horror film directed by David Hartman and written by Hartman and Don Coscarelli. It's the fifth and final installment in the Phantasm series, and in it Reggie is wandering through the desert seeking out his friend Mike and the evil tall man. Okay, so this is undoubtedly the most confusing one of the bunch. I really have no idea what to make of it, and yet the ending made me shed a tear. It was sad, though confusing, and I really felt like a goodbye. The one good thing you can take from this franchise is how they consistently use the same cast. For this one, they even brought back the original Lady in Lavender, which was from the first film, so the fact it's been the same guys mostly for nearly 40 years is unbelievable and quite awesome, but I still have no idea what was going on in this film. It's the first film in the series not directed by Don Coscarelli, and it shows. Usually the films would use practical effects, but this has more CGI use, and that teamed with how it was shot made it feel and look like one of those bad mutant monster movies on sci-fi that I watch. I watch a lot of those, by the way. I'd say this is probably the worst of the franchise, but I admit they have a certain charm, mostly thanks to the cast. Number 145, Polaroid, a 2019 American supernatural horror film directed by Lars Klevberg with a screenplay by Blair Butler, based on the 2015 short film of the same name. High school loner Bird Fitcher has no idea what dark secrets are tied to the mysterious Polaroid vintage camera she stumbles upon, but it doesn't take long to discover that those who have their picture taken meet a tragic end. I had wanted to watch this for last year's October marathon because the plot sounded awful, but the release date kept getting pushed back. Now I finally have, and honestly, I didn't hate it at all. I really thought I would loathe this film, and maybe it's because my expectations were so low it didn't end up so bad. It's a reasonable story, though they took it directly from an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, which I think they may have even taken from a Goosebumps story, and I found those versions much better. The acting was good, which I wasn't expecting, but it's not scary. Aesthetically, it's devoid of colour and sticks to cold monotone colours, which added to the fact so much of the film is shot in the dark, makes most of it hard to see. I think the creature design was quite ridiculous, especially when you consider what the creature is and how the camera even works when it was dropped in a tub. A photo developer back in the day is beyond me. I actually like the twists and reveals at the end. I don't know if they needed that many, but they made the story more interesting than it originally was. Overall, it was an okay watch and nowhere near as shit as I expected. Number 146, Poltergeist, a 1982 American supernatural horror film directed by Tobe Hooper with a screenplay by Steven Spielberg, Michael Grace, and Mark Victor from a story by Spielberg. Set in a California suburb, the plot focuses on a family whose home is invaded by malevolent ghosts that abduct their young daughter and the family's attempts to bring her back into the real world. This film is brilliant. I love the clever use of old school practical effects to balance out the very necessary special effects. I think the story is great. I love that there is a final confrontation when you think it's over. The clown attacking the kid definitely made me jump the first time I watched it. The creepiest thing about this movie was Carol Ann, just her appearance and behavior. I mean, she looked like one of the kids from Village of the Damned. Absolutely love this movie. Number 147, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, a 1986 American supernatural horror film directed by Brian Gibson and written by Michael Grace and Mark Victor. It's the second entry in the Poltergeist series and features the return of the original family who are once again confronted by a spirit trying to harm their daughter Carol Ann. As far as sequels go, I didn't hate it. In fact, I rather enjoyed it. I kind of like how they make Carol Ann psychic and have it run in the family. I think at least one of the monsters were truly creepy and disturbing. I also think the backstory of the beast was actually pretty cool, but I think most of everything else was a bit over the top in a way that wasn't necessary, and some moments got a bit nuts. I did love that it includes majority of the cast from the first film, so that was a good touch. Only person not included was Dominique Doon, who played the family's eldest daughter, Dana. In real life, Dominique was murdered by her abusive boyfriend shortly before the first film premiered. She died at the age of 22, sadly. Number 148, Poltergeist 3, a 1988 American supernatural horror film directed by Gary Sherman and written by Sherman and Brian Taggart. It's the third entry in the Poltergeist film series, and in it, Carol Ann is staying with her aunt in a high-rise building where the supernatural forces haunting her make their return. Good acting, but holy moly, the story was ridiculous. The dialogue was insanely repetitive. Characters just saying the same things over and over and over again. I'm now sick of the name Carol Ann. You can only hear it said so many times before you go insane, and in this film it was said 121 times, and that is not an exaggeration, that's a fact. I do think it was cool they were able to bring her actress back, but the film does a bad job at connecting to the other films. It's an okay watch, especially if you're watching this series, but it's not that great. Just okay. I don't blame people for thinking the franchise is cursed. Dominique Doon was murdered at age 22 after filming the first film. Julian Beck died of cancer after filming the second film. And Heather O'Rourke, who played Carol Ann, died from cardiac arrest at age 12 before post-production was completed on the third film. That's a lot of bad luck. Number 149, Poltergeist, a 2015 American supernatural horror film directed by Gil Keenan from a screenplay by David Lindsay-Abaire. A remake of the 1982 film, it's the fourth and final entry in the Poltergeist film series. A family whose suburban home is haunted by evil forces must come together to rescue their youngest daughter after the apparitions take her captive. I had seen the remake before I ever saw the original, and it does nothing for me. I felt it had a very arrogant, petty tone, especially among its characters. The remake really is a slap in the face to the original and isn't even as good as the original by a fraction. So many changes, none of which makes this film better than the original. If anything, they really make it worse, or at least blander. They've made so many of the characters unlikable, and on top of that, made so many of them irresponsible. This film is just trying to show off. It just didn't get my attention as much as the original. You could feel this was trying too hard. Whew, I'm out of breath. So, that is recap number 5, done and dusted. My out of breath self is going to finish this video now, but please, if you have seen any of the films that I have talked about in this video, please comment down below and tell me what you thought of them, and you can also tell me which ones you have never heard of before and if you feel like checking them out. I promise the rest of my recaps are coming. I know that they're late, but hey, at least I'm still talking about movies, so they're still going to get done. Please be patient with me. They are coming. Thank you as always to my amazing, amazing patrons, and until next time, bye.